Well. This is the first time I've ever done this. I'm doing a post-game interview from the fourth week of the LCS during the beginning of the fifth week. It is Monday, the day after, and I'm interviewing Zeyzal because we were just discussing about this. When I requested the interview yesterday, I was told yes, I could have it 2 hours after the games. Of course, this coverage is brought to you by Alienware. But as we get into it, so why why did you decide? Because then I said I was going to be busy, so here we are on Monday. So what led you to to say you needed to have a lot of extra time?
I think the main reason is just I wanted to make sure that I wasn't giving, I guess, emotional answers after that game because it was a hard game and it was a bit disappointing, honestly, like how hard we struggled to beat IMT in their current form.
Yeah. So you guys ended up winning it, but uh, in a very strange way. Do you want to break down sort of how everything was going at the end?
Yeah, so I guess the main thing to consider is we basically got the end result was we got caught in mid lane and we ended up in a 4v5 situation where we have an essentially an undefended bot lane and they have control of Elder and it's 4v5. And the death respawn at this point is 60 seconds. So I've rewatched it a lot of times now, but it's really a hard situation anyway. But we had mid push, so we could walk down mid or we could contest Elder in a 4v5. So we had to make that decision. I think we made the wrong one. We decided to contest Elder, failed the steal, and then now it's a 3v5, and they just won the steal on Elder. So then they walk down bot in a 3v5. We eventually defend, and then it becomes like a 3v4, I think was the end result, where they tried to dive, and miraculously we just won a 3v4 fight under our Nexus turrets and TP'd mid and won the game.
So was the battle at the end underneath your Nexus turrets miraculous, or was that them like overstaying, over pushing? Was that a mistake on their end?
I think you have to end the game there if you're IMT. I think in general, my feeling would be that they don't even need to dive us. Like, if they just hit our turrets, we can't go on them or we'll lose. So in a way, them going on us was their mistake because they're just going to win the game if we don't go on them. We're the
Right.
ones that have to make the move. So they ended up overforcing their hand and ended up in a scenario where we could just hit them for free while they were diving our double Nexus turrets, and that pretty much lost them the game.
So EG right now kind of reminds me a lot of TL. And even TSM had this a little bit before too, where it's like you guys are winning games and people consider you to be a good team, but you're so unhappy with the way that you're winning them. And a lot of people are, people then come out and say, oh, they didn't deserve that win or whatever. Why? One, do you think that that's a fair assessment? Is that true? I mean, certainly yesterday seems like it was a pretty messy game. And two, why do you think it is that we're seeing the good teams win in so many bad ways?
So to answer the first part, I think that the win yesterday was feeling so bad because I guess we have the expectations of ourselves that it's to be higher than just struggling to beat an IMT roster that has only been playing together for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I think in part that it wasn't really a deserved win because I think if the team had been together for longer, they would have easily ended that game in that scenario. But I also agree that TSM, TL, and us, all three, kind of have the same thing where it's like we're not really consistently winning despite being front runners for like 2, 3, 4 slots.
Yeah. And even in the
And
wins that a lot of these teams are having, they don't, the players are so salty after because they're bad. They're bad. It's like normally I don't interview the losing team because I find that they usually just give bad interviews because they're really frustrated with the way that they want, or their loss, obviously. But in this case, it feels like frequently the winning team is just as angry with the loss or the win. I'm all over the place. The win because, of the way that it happened. And so I guess, why do you think it is that we're seeing such messy results, win or loss, from these supposedly really good teams?
I'm honestly not sure. I know for us, it's a bit of like we don't make as good decisions in our stage matches as we do in scrims, and we're just really much more inconsistent on stage than we are in scrims. So we pretty much have a very refined play style and one that we practice a lot, but I think on stage it all kind of goes to hell. Like something goes wrong and we kind of get confused. And then like I said, when I was rewatching the Elder fight, it's like we're just making decisions. We're kind of just oinking around and waiting to see what happens. And I think that's a part of the problem for us, is that we take a bit of a wait and see approach on stage, when in scrims we're always trying to think proactively and make decisions like that will put the enemy on the spot rather than us just waiting to see what happens. I'm not sure the same for TL and TSM. I think that draft actually does matter a lot right now. So I think like our game versus Team Liquid, we had a really strong draft. So that's why that game was kind of a blowout. Like it's not that the players didn't do anything wrong, but the
Right.
players were in a situation where their draft, at least from my perspective, was a pretty hard one to win with. So I think that's why our match kind of looked like a blowout. And I guess you could say similarly with some of our matches, we've had drafts that aren't really like I guess like Evil Genius's style.
Yeah. What do you guys need to do? Is it literally just clean up the draft a little bit and play like you do in scrims, and then you guys will be, maybe the second best team behind Cloud9?
I think every team will say that, like play like scrims, but I think what we need to do, like an actual actionable plan, is we need to make sure we're more vocal about the picks we're willing to play on stage and when we're like essentially what bands we need to play them. And then I think we need to focus on more proactivity on stage rather than a wait and see approach, which we often take. So I think that includes things like early game I was watching the game and I see like opportunities for us to take Dragon, but we're not really taking the proactive side of the control of the game when we should be. And that's a fault I've noticed in a lot of our stage games. So that's something that's like an actionable thing we can change, is we think about when we can make proactive plays and be sure to capitalize on them in our
Yeah.
next stage games.
So far this split, what do you think of your personal performance? Because I know you took a lot of heat when you were on C9 last year, and I feel like Spring Split hasn't. I don't think that there's a lot of analysts that would be like, well, Zeyzals fully redeemed himself, God tier support in the LCS right now. Do you think that you are still struggling to show your potential, or are you where you want to be?
I think I've taken a different role than I did on C9, and I think it's helped in a few ways. So something I was really upset with yesterday was I think it was probably my first isolated death in like 20 games on stage. And I mean, obviously I should never die isolated, but like I was actually really upset that I made the mistake to get caught out isolated. Like it was the first time in a long time I've just lost track of where the enemy was and died doing something that I shouldn't have been doing. So I guess to answer the question more directly would be I'm not fully happy with where I am, and what I think is I've kind of shifted from a player that focuses a lot on setting up good fights and getting engages off, which is kind of what my role was on C9, to a player that kind of helps more so set up our macro side of things, because I think on C9 it was a lot more natural, the macro aspect. Whereas with EG, I think we kind of have to lead more, or specifically, I have to lead more
Yeah.
in the macro sense. So I focus a lot more on that. So that's why, like, it really bothered me that I had that isolated death where I lost track of the enemies, and that's something that like should never happen with the role I'm taking.
Right.
That I cannot lose track of the enemy with what I do to help my team. And yeah, I think I've changed my playstyle a bit, but I also think I've gotten better in general. But I haven't gotten better at what I was good at on C9.
Speaking of C9, and I apologize, I imagine you probably get asked about them a lot in interviews, but given that you were on the team previously, and I think you're pretty well respected in terms of your ability to kind of analyze teams, it's a question I have to ask, which is, you it feels like this team continues to be so dominant. I know there's a lot of hope from different teams that maybe this split they'll be more contested. And early on, it did seem like we had a lot of really good teams right behind them. It doesn't seem to be the case anymore. So do you think there's any chance people are going to catch up on these guys? And do you have any insight into really what it is that's allowing them to have such a solid lock on the league?
I think for one, going back to our problem, it's like we have a problem with proactivity. They're the opposite. They're
Yeah.
very proactive, very good on not only in scrims, but they maintain like a, a pretty close to a 1-to-1 like swap, maybe even higher, but like they actually get better on stage, and that's a factor that we really struggle with, and I think most teams in general struggle with, but Cloud9 excels in that regard where they're good in scrims, they're even better on stage, and that's what makes it so difficult to catch up to them because a lot of the teams just struggle to translate performance at like an even close to result, but they just do almost better. And I think just top to bot, they're all really good players, and it's hard to beat them on an individual level. And obviously, like I said previously, it's like a lot of those players know how to function around the map very well by themselves, so they don't really need help doing macro. So they're just very good at playing fast and proactive.
Do you, as a player in this league, have any insight or thoughts on how well they could do internationally? I know it's really difficult to say when you can't, like, measuring leagues that don't play against each other. It's hard to say, but I'm curious if this could be like the best team we've ever had go internationally, or if they just maybe they're as good as other great teams that we've had in the past. It's just that the rest of the league seems like they're figuring their shit out still.
I would be curious to how well or how they can win games when they're outskilled in individual lanes because they really don't have that problem here at all, right? It's very rare you're going to see a player on C9 lose their lane because they're outplayed or just outskilled. And that's a realistic possibility when they go against, I would say, some of the European teams as well as some of the LPL teams.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure how it would play out. Like, I haven't been, I mean, I went to Worlds last year, but like, I haven't seen those players in a while, so it's hard for me to tell. Maybe if I was able to boot camp and things like that, I would know closer to their skill level, but I feel like C9 is quite good individually, so I don't think it's huge risk, but I would be curious to see how they do against like an LPL team that has better laners than them, especially.
Yeah. Do you think that C9 it, so much of their strength, do you think a lot of it is that they're outlaning the people or outskilling the individuals that they're facing in the LCS, or do you think it, because you mentioned a lot of it being the proactive side, right? So it's I wonder if it's like, okay, if they can just hold their own, against some of these other teams, maybe they can outmaneuver them or take objectives in a better way or something. I like it's really hard for me to gauge, and I never know. It's one of those things where I don't know if I should be hyped for the possibility of these guys facing teams at Worlds if they're able to make it, or if I should be like, I really gotta like simmer down my expectations.
I just can't know offhand
Yeah.
because I don't know how they match up individually. And my concern is that they don't have a problem making proactive plays because they naturally win almost all three lanes. They don't
Yeah.
actually use like mid jungle, they usually win 2v2 and then they immediately move that somewhere else. But what if they run into a roadblock where they like lose mid 2v2 and don't recover? Like what happens? How does C9's playstyle change? And that's something I have to see that no NA team is currently doing, like beating them in those positions we need to beat them in, and then we'd have to see how they play from there to know how good they'd be. But as it stands, they're just very good at being proactive, and even when they're behind, they know how to get good fights. But I think a lot of their wins does come from just being good and proactive at the same time. And that especially works when they're better than their opponents.
The Cloud9 and G2 Twitter accounts are teasing what seems to me to be a very, very obviously already discussed like show match between them or some situation like that where G2's playing on NA servers. How bad would that be for G2 if they're playing on really shitty ping across the Atlantic?
It'd be pretty bad. I feel like G2 would not have a good time on 130 ping. That
Yeah.
you would get what I get on EUS is 137, so I'd assume they might not get identical, but similar to that. So I'd assume it would not be very fun, but I would say if their ping goes down to like 90, 80, maybe it's looking a bit closer, but at 130 it'd be a very very sad match to play for G2, I think.
Yeah. I mean, is it even worth it for anybody to play it at that point in time? Because if G2 beats C9 on that ping, then like, people should just not watch Worlds if C9 goes. It's just sort of like,
yeah.
it's really bad. If C9 beats G2, it's like, great. Well, you could very clearly tell that like the skill shots just weren't going off in time, or like, the players were getting outmaneuvered because they just were playing with such a huge handicap. So, is it even worth it in your opinion?
From a from a player standpoint, no, but maybe marketing it would be.
Yeah.
Like I don't think either set of players is really going to benefit from playing on the ping. My understanding is that Perks also might still. I don't know if he's still on break, but he was just on break as well, right? So it's like from a player standpoint, I'm gonna say it's not worth it, but from a marketing standpoint, I can see some geniuses in the marketing team really pushing for this.
Geniuses like Portillo.
Yeah, that
Mateus.
social media team, but yeah, I mean, maybe it's him too.
Okay, last question, and I know I'm going to get flamed for asking so many C9 questions to an EG player, but I really value your perspective on this stuff, and I think you're more thoughtful about this than other pro players. But I'm thinking about doing a video. I might talk about it on Hotline League tonight. If not, I might do a video about it, and I think having this conversation with you will force me to actually make the video. But we don't know how everything's going to work out with Worlds and how easily it will be for us to get a North American team into China because of all the COVID stuff. So, question for you is, if C9, if you look at the timelines and maybe they need to like quarantine in another country first, or they need to like quarantine in China and they don't have enough time. If C9 could be guaranteed to compete at Worlds, but they have to skip summer finals, and the rest of the teams, are asked like, hey, do you guys want to just let C9 have one of these spots? Because chances are they would get a third, maybe they go as like the third seed or something from North America or whatever. Do you think that would be fair?
My initial instinct is when you say fair, there's no chance that it's fair.
Yeah.
Unless it's like they say, unless playoffs are resolved like immediately, there's no way any of us are going to China for Worlds. Like maybe in a situation where the hand is forced, but I would say my instinct would be no. And I mean, I don't want to. I could think of other solutions, but I guess for this specific question,
yeah, I mean, it's a super crazy hypothetical. I'm just like, it's the type of thing where I'm foreseeing a convoluted shit show about trying to get North American teams to Worlds. I mean, like literally, a lot of other countries are closing their borders to us right now, and so I just wonder if we should be prepared for some sort of weird negotiation to occur in order to get.
So in this, is there only one team going? Am I right to assume this?
No, I think what you would say is, because I mean, think about visas, right? Like you never really know how this stuff is going to work. Governments are random and confusing, and tons of stuff that can process. So if it's like, hey, we cannot guarantee we can get NA teams in time for either group stage or play-ins or something like that. But we know we can guarantee getting a team in over there right now if we start right now and they leave right now, or like quarantine starts beginning now, or I don't know. It's like the type of thing where would you gamble a guaranteed chance of C9 making it to Worlds so that they can compete and we have a North American representative against the possibility that we have no teams over there, for instance?
As a competitor, I wouldn't, but I think thinking about it logically, like if I take myself outside of the competition, I think it would be okay.
Yeah.
I wouldn't like it in the position I'm in because it would feel like kind of robbing us of the chance to play them, and like earn earn our spot, obviously.
Right.
But I think it makes sense in the situation where it was necessary to guarantee one team can go to Worlds. It makes sense that it'd be C9, and I think they're the team that deserves it most, no
Yeah.
doubt.
I just think it's going to be interesting if there are compromises that need to be made, or we do need to figure it out. I don't know. Either way, Zeyzal, thank you so much for the interview. I'm glad we were able to do this, and I selfishly stole some extra time with you. It was a long interview because I waited to today. But thank you so much. Anything you want to say to any of the fans out there?
Yeah, so thanks for being a fan of me, as well as Evil Geniuses, I'd hope. But yeah, I'm hoping that we can make sure our games are looking a lot more decisive in our favor, of course, and we can continue to improve.
Well, thank you so much for the interview. For everyone else, you can check out the rest of my coverage of all things esports right here on my YouTube channel. I know I sometimes get zany with these outros, but I just want to make this one short and easy. Alienware has provided me with hardware that has allowed me to create really cool content during this quarantine, even before the quarantine. But I mean, I wouldn't be able to do the stuff that I do from home if it wasn't for their assistance. So please go check them out. Alienware.com/Travis. Travis 10 off Q2. I'm going to leave that in there. All right. You're going to see what it's like behind the scenes here so that you know this is an authentic message. Travis 10 off Q2 is the code. Save 10% at checkout. And there's a link in the video description. Thanks so much to Alienware for making this whole thing happen.